For our final panel, though, we have asked 4 of our attendees, each of whom has long been engaged in higher education in our state, to consider issues and questions raised during this symposium from a more specific Texas perspective. Dr. Dennis Brown assumed the position of president of Lee College in February of 2012, and before that served for 12 years as vice president of instruction and chief academic officer at El Paso Community College. He has for over 38 years been an administrator and a teacher at community colleges. Dr. David E. Daniel is the 4th president of the University of Texas at Dallas. He served on the engineering faculty at UT Austin from 1980 to 1996. In 1996, he moved out of our great state of Texas to the University of Illinois, finishing his service as Dean of Engineering there, and then returning to our state of Texas to be appointed to UT Dallas's presidency in 2005. Now, you might wonder why Dr. Katharine Brooks is on this panel related to a Texas perspective when her current position is Executive Director of the Office of Personal and Career Development for Wake Forest University. But prior to that, she had a position for 10 years as the Director of Liberal Arts Career Services for the University of Texas at Austin, right here. Prior to 2003, she was the Director of Career Services for Dickinson College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And she's the author of You Majored in What? Mapping Your Path from Chaos to Career. And finally, our session moderator is Dr. Jesse Rogers, president of Midwestern State University. Dr. Rogers has served MSU for over 40 years as a professor of physics and chemistry, head of the Department of Chemistry, vice president of academic affairs, and now president. Dr. Rogers?
I promised I wasn't going to say this to some of my friends in the audience, but we actually don't feel like Liz Taylor's last husband, but we'll work to make this interesting anyway. I think we can lead into some of the discussions that we've had today, and I've decided to start with Dr. Kate Brooks. I believe she works in an area that's relevant to many of the things we've said today, and I'm going to ask her in a very, I guess I'd say, very literal way. But Kate, how can institutions help students who have a passion, who are working toward a true liberal arts degree as we know it today? How can an institution help them develop that degree and and their background into marketable skills when they hold that traditional liberal arts background?
Well, I guess I would start with the opening statement of how many of you are in careers or in the job that you thought you would be in at age 18? Yeah, don't ever ask this question to a group of lawyers or accountants because all the hands go up, so just so you know. I think that's sort of the crux. It's how do you predict? How do you work with students when you're trying to predict what someone is going to do? It's the intersection, I like to say, between career services and physics, because chaos theory comes into play. It is a complex thing, just like predicting the weather. Predicting someone's career is complex because there are a lot of things that emerge. There are a lot of factors that go into it. It's not as simple as drilling it down to how much money will I make. I know that's a factor, but it's just a factor. And just like what is my major is another factor. It's that classic question that my liberal arts students get. What are you going to do with that major? You know what? They're not going to do anything with the major. They're going to do what they do, and then the major gives them a perspective, a way of viewing, a body of knowledge, a way of viewing how they're going to do whatever it is that they're going to do. The advantage of chaos, or one I guess not so much advantage, but an aspect of chaos theory is what we all know is the butterfly effect, the small effect that can cause a major change. I've had students get jobs because they played in a handbell choir and they happened to announce that they were interested in returning back to study in Russia, and the next thing they know they're working for Carlisle Syntech and handling their new taking executives over to their new operations in Moscow. One of my former students, I also used to teach film studies, and one of my former students got a job at CNN because he knew about a clip from the movie High Noon. And he thought it was a perfect illustration to be used on a particular show that CNN was producing. And they switched him from intern to employee shortly after that. I myself got a contract I got my agent because I tried to think of the most, I don't know how to put this, maybe, I hate to say irrelevant, but perhaps the least used fact from my undergraduate study of sociology and anthropology. And in writing my query to my agent, I said, if a student can analyze the Yanomamo tribe, they can analyze the culture at Dell. And that line was enough to have her say, I want to see your book proposal. So how do you plan for a future that you can't see? I'm reminded of one of my favorite authors, E.L. Doctorow. He was asked how he writes his books. Do you outline them? Do you do it chapter by chapter? And of course, he's known for the wonderful characters that he creates. And he said, no, I just create the characters. They live in my head. They tell me the story. He said, the metaphor he used was, he said, it's like driving a car at night in the fog. You can only see as far as your headlights, but you can make the whole journey that way. Now, we have students whose headlights take them 7 years out through medical school, through law school. I have some students whose headlights take them to dinner. And that's okay, because we can help them get to the next step. So it's how do we get them from where they are to where they want to be? So I think ultimately what we have to do as institutions is create career entrepreneurs. We need to create students who are nimble, who are constant and never-ending learners, who see the patterns between different fields, the way an interdisciplinary major does, for example, who see the ways that what they're learning in biology connects with what they're learning in anthropology, connects with what they're learning in whatever other course they're taking, so that they can start to combine those things. Some really good examples to me in the world are Steve Jobs, who basically had the mantra, don't make it better, make it different. He said, we don't want Apple to be just a better Hewlett-Packard. We want them to be different. And so getting our students to think that way. Herb Simon, who won the Nobel Prize for his work in artificial intelligence, when he was asked, how did he create this field, or how did this come about? He said it was because he had studied psychology, computer science, and economics. And he called it his network of possible wanderings. It's the places that his mind could go, his brain could go, because he had studied those different subjects. It allowed him to pull it all together with his team, of course. And so creating students who can be entrepreneurial, who have and can take advantage of this network of possible wanderings that they have developed by virtue of where they've come from and what they're studying and what they're interested in. Because finding meaning in a job, again, is not, I hope it doesn't regress to the mean of one thing, such as money. It is money, of course that's important, but so are things like prestige or your own, how proud are you of what you do in the field that you're in? Are you using your interests and your passions? Are you using your talents and your skills? And does what you do make a difference? Those things all come in different levels for different people, but you combine all that, and that's your complexity. That's where you start to see what makes a career. So for us, I think what we really need to do is it's got to start in the classroom. It's got to go back to the education, to the professors, and there needs to be a team effort with the career services folks as well to be able to look at how are we helping students become entrepreneurs about their own careers, whatever field they're going into.
Very well said. And you, do you have colleagues in your office and work with the faculty? Tell us how you're
I was
organized.
actually sort of brought in to work with the liberal arts faculty. My supervisor is a gentleman named Andy Chan, who's actually gotten sort of known in this field. He's an MBA from Stanford, and so his approach is very metrics-based and very much a lot of design thinking and that sort of thing. And my approach is to start by working with the faculty, finding out what they're interested in, what they're doing, which students they gravitate towards, and getting the faculty and the students to tell me what makes a good English major. You know, what are the skills to be a great English major at this school? Because every school is different. You know, what makes you successful in this major? And then the next and very most important line is, why would an employer care? Because you can't just go and talk about how much you love Jane Austen. You need to be able to explain to the employer. You've got to remember the mantra of marketing, you know, is find out what the customer wants and tie everything to it. How do I tie what I have learned in the classroom to what that employer wants? So it is that blending, and that becomes very important.
Excellent. Very well said. Very interesting. Dr. Brown, first let me tell you a little bit about my background so you'll see where this question came from. Perhaps we should have started with this, because I will warn you ahead of time, this question really is one of your opinion and experience, and it'll be interesting to see how much agreement we get from the audience. But I will tell you, I have been in higher education actually over 40 years. In fact, it's 47 years as a professor and as a provost and as a president. And I do believe that I recall no time during the 47 years with no break that there's ever been the apparent belief among university faculties and university administrators and legislators that we're on the edge of a precipitous change in higher education. There is so much now written, there's so many conferences. We are analyzing and going through a process of introspection that I've not experienced in the 47 years. I don't know if you could say that or not. But would you comment on what's precipitated that in your mind? Is it the burgeoning cost of higher education? I realize some time back for our university, we can't just keep raising tuition 3.5% a year. It's got to end somewhere. What are we going to do? Is it the lack of access to higher education? I believe the commissioners, I don't want to give the wrong number, but I believe our freshman class into our colleges and universities in Texas this year, 60% or some large number like that were eligible for Pell Grants. Or is it the use of technology in the classroom and to take education to those who can't get into the classroom? Is it the decline in interest in STEM? I won't go on forever. Or is it the tremendous accountability that's required of higher education, of regional accrediting bodies, the Department of Education, the state? What's pushed us to the point that we are right now?
Well, thanks for the question. I guess, first of all, good afternoon to everybody. You listed several things, access and cost and technology, and you also talked about accountability. You've beat me by a number of years. I've been in community colleges for 38 years, and to me, what's happening now within higher education, I think nationally for sure, but clearly in the state of Texas, are the requirements for accountability. We've been dealing with access for a very, very long time, and that's been an important part and will continue to be an important part of our higher education landscape. But also what's happening now, I think, more than ever before, is that we're beginning to look, and others are beginning to look, from legislatures to local boards to state agencies, at exactly what are we doing and how well are we doing it. And Dr. Schneider's 5 steps this morning, kind of, for me anyways, rung the bell again about, we bring them in, we move them out, how long does it take them to get out and get that degree, what's the cost in doing it, and then of course, what job do they get as a result of that? And time to degree is one that for many of us, whether it's a federal or a state or any other kind of a requirement, is one that is critical because, especially in community colleges, a lot of students spend more than enough time to accumulate the credits to get their associate degrees. But so do some of the students that move on into the university. And so we've got a challenge. And I think the answer to the question, as you've posed it, is that we are going to continue to be held accountable in a way that we probably have never seen before. At least I haven't in the time that I've been in my position, and I suspect, Jesse, in the time that you've been in yours. We all want the student to come in. We all want them to successfully transition through their higher education career and come out with that certificate or that degree in the appropriate amount of time. But it's not going to happen. You know, I think of the phrase, life happens. Life happens at community colleges all the time. But life happens at universities just as often as it does in the two-year schools. And there are things in life about our students that we can control, and there are things in life about a student that we cannot control. For those things that we can control, then it's very, very important for us to do all of what we've got a success initiatives that are just superb, they're well thought out, and we can execute them, and they work very, very well for the most part. The dilemma that we have is that as we implement these, there's a certain percentage of students who will be directly impacted in a positive way by these success initiatives. Those of us in community colleges have been very fortunate to be a part of achieving the dream. It is one of those transformational things that comes along, I think in my career anyways, and many other community college folks' careers, that is making a significant difference. It will never impact every student who comes into our colleges in a positive way. It's just not going to happen. But for those that it does, then that's tremendous. We are going to, for the next foreseeable future, and I don't see it letting up any at all as we move forward, continue to be pressed for ensuring that students who come in are getting into and out of successfully obtaining their degree, obtaining their certificate in an appropriate amount of time. And that's not going to stop. Performance-based funding is a part of it. Currently, as we know, in Texas, it's 10%. Likely that's going to continue to increase. I hate to think of it as, the proverbial, hammer over the head as a way to get you to produce better at your individual colleges. I'd like to think that it's a way just to help us find ways that we can be more creative and be more effective in our ability to work with our students. But in closing, let me just say, Jesse, we've got too many diverse students with too many issues, some of which we are able to deal with, some of which we are not, that are going to impact our ability to be able to have significant numbers of students get from point A to point B, although none of us in higher education will ever stop trying to do that. And that's why I think we have this conversation going on across the nation, is to ensure that we are always looking at ways that we can help the student be as successful as they can. And by the way, when they come into higher education, whether it's a community college or it's a university, what's their purpose for being there? For the most part, it's to obtain a particular skill that will allow them to create for them in their own way and through their life an opportunity that has not been afforded them up to this point. Several speakers today talked about the fact that a high school diploma, it's not going to be what you need to have a successful experience in the workforce and certainly in your personal life.
Excellent answer. It would be easy to say all of the above, those examples that I gave, and I certainly believe each of those will affect higher education, our pedagogy, majors, so forth. But I too recognize that the introspection that I talked about is being pushed certainly by the degree of accountability. I don't want anyone to ever believe, though, that administrators and faculty that I've known for all of my career in higher education haven't felt accountable to their students. But to demonstrate that accountability, our university just went through Southern Association accreditation again, and meeting the institutional effectiveness standards. It was all I could do to keep the morale of the faculty up and get them to truly believe that their assessment and instruments and so forth could be made part of their teaching, because there was a great feeling, I didn't come here to do this, I was taken away from it. But nonetheless, it's an excellent answer, and I agree, certainly do agree with that. And it'd be interesting to know how people in the audience feel about it too. But I think the thirst for accountability seems to have no end. We now have federal standards in our accreditation, and that certainly pushes on the regional accrediting bodies, which pushes on the states. But well said, appreciate it very much. David, I haven't forgotten you, and my belief is that this question might lead you into some other areas, so feel free to move off with this. But I've been somewhat surprised. I was sort of ghostwriting, I guess you'd say, a speech for one of our board members who's an engineer a few years ago. So I did what my granddaughter always says, well, Granddad, Google it. And I couldn't believe the articles that I found actually that existed that made the claim, and with information to back it up. Yet, yes, we are a nation today that's struggling with unemployment. We can't seem to get below the 6%. But the claims were made that we are more a nation of unemployable than we are a nation of unemployed. In fact, I would not quote the numbers. They changed from article to article, but they were certainly impressive in nature. One article claims that at any one time since the Great Recession, there are 4 million high-quality jobs open in this country, and that, in fact, we are losing more high-technology, well-paying jobs than we are labor jobs in the force. Would you comment on that? What is going on and what has caused that? Is that your observation too?
Well, thank you, Jesse. Let me first of all thank all the speakers and the audience. It's been a very informative conference. I think we've revisited some old ground, like do you train for a first job or educate for a lifetime, but we've done so in a modern context. The Texas Workforce Commission estimates that Texas is going to need another 90,000 engineers between now and the end of this decade, which would, if they're right, if these engineers are to come out of Texas colleges and universities, mean we almost need to double the production of engineers in Texas colleges and universities. And I think there is a big mismatch in many respects to what the job needs are and what the supply is. And I think many of these causes are well known. STEM fields are not terribly popular with students. Math is not terribly popular. You might be interested to know that many other developed countries of the world suffer that same problem. Go to Korea and the Koreans will tell you there's a declining interest in mathematics in Korea and other developed countries. It seems as though as the wealth per capita of a country ascends to higher levels, that students get less and less interested in subjects like math and science and engineering. But I would like to comment on the stated conference goal, the purpose of higher education, and ask the question in what context, from the point of view of Texas, from the point of view of the nation. I can imagine being in Washington, D.C., attending a conference called The Purposes of Higher Education in the 21st Century in a Global Context. And what's so fascinating to me is the conversation in America about higher education and all the change, and a lot of people who believe that brick and mortar as we know it today will go away, or that the financial model is so unsustainable that these institutions will collapse under their own weight. But when you go to Singapore, you go to China, or you go to Korea, what you find is that those countries are pouring everything they've got into copying the great American public research university. They are trying to fundamentally replicate the University of Michigan, the University of California at Berkeley, et cetera, et cetera. Name your favorite great American research university. Walk onto one of those campuses and ask what their tuition is. It's free. Go to Korea. Every public university college student in Korea pays no tuition and no room and board. And in fact, they invite a limited number of international students to visit their university free of charge to that student, because it's believed to be good for the society as a whole. And what's so interesting to me is that I think the real question is whether we as a people will come to value higher education as a public good as we once did, or continue to view it increasingly as a private benefit as we do now, to be paid for by the individual who benefits, namely the student, even if that necessitates loans. So I think the purpose of higher education at its most fundamental level in this country revolves around the question, is this a public good or a private benefit? And I believe with great passion that it's a public good, that in fact the nation benefits from these great universities, this wonderful ecosystem of community colleges, where in Miami that college adds so much value to that city that companies have to be there. And I'm sure each of you in your universities have examples of you being the raison d'etre of various entities in your particular cities. I sometimes Google the National Venture Capital Association to look to see where the private money goes, because it's one thing for the government money to flow another a certain way. It's another for venture capitalists to put their money where they think the risk is. And if you just pull up the National Venture Capital Association website, they've got a list of companies, a big cute logo of companies that were started by venture capital. And these are great companies, Facebook, Google, Medtronics, on and on. But what struck me with the 25 or so companies shown there, besides them being great companies with great salaries and great benefits for scientists, for engineers, for all sorts of people, is that almost each and every one of them has one thing in common besides venture capital, and that is they were all started in cities with great academic research universities, all of them in cities with AAU universities. And I look again in Singapore and go, well, why is Singapore pouring so much money into NUS, for example, and aligning their sort of economic development activities with those universities? Well, I would say come to Austin and take a look at what's happened to Austin in the last 30 or 40 years. UT evolved from a pretty good university in the Southwest to one of the great universities of the world. They partnered tremendously with the local government. There used to be no venture capital money in Austin, and now half of all the VC in Texas is right here in the city of Austin. And it goes to show the kind of synergy at this level of a great academic research university that we see here. But we see it in other ways for all kinds of universities. My greatest fear is that the only really, really good universities in America in a few decades will be private because the public has completely disinvested. I do think it begs the question of how we're going to fund, or if I should say, if we're going to fund, let's say in the Texas government, public higher education, and if we're going to fund it, how are we going to fund it? It may well be that the current subsidy system is not the best way to do it. It might be that financial aid for students might be a better way to distribute limited resources. But I think that question is key. I think finally, to finish this off, again, looking at it from a globally competitive environment, I'm going to make the radical assumption that the very best case for funding from government, Barry, don't look at me when I say this, is that it won't go down further. I'm afraid the most optimistic prediction of state funding is that it will not decline further, and I hope I'm wrong. But if that's the case, I think that the community colleges are going to play a key role because they offer a real opportunity for students to get access, to save a huge amount of money, and to transfer into our four-year colleges and still get that four-year degree and a high level of education and training from those institutions. But to me, the fundamental changes as we talk about how this is all going to morph or more around the basic funding model and what makes the most sense in light of limited or perhaps more realistically reduced state funding. And then you come back to the original question, how do you get people into these fields where you really need them? I think it just involves getting the word out to these students and letting them know what the opportunities are. And again, back to the funding model, I think even stronger interactions between our universities and the private sector are going to be critical. I mean, start guaranteeing someone a job or a summer internship. It is profoundly impactful. Just as you said, one little touch point in somebody's life can make so much impact on their life. We've got to get the businesses in, and I think we've got to figure out a way to do this in partnership with the government in the way that some countries are actually doing much better than we.
The only thing. Yeah. But you definitely agree. We're at the point now, we are importing a lot of the talent we need in the high technology or
Well, we are
disciplines.
importing,
Yeah,
but just look
doctors.
at Texas. So Texas attracts 6,000 college-going students out of high school every year to the state of Texas from the other 49 states to attend our colleges and universities. 6,000 coming to Texas. We export 18,000 high school graduates from the state of Texas every year to attend colleges and universities in other states. We are a net exporter, brain drain, if you will, of 12,000 students per year attending colleges and universities in other states. So here we are talking about K through 12 education. We're talking about the top of that food chain, if you will, the ones who can get admitted to colleges and universities, and we send them off to other states. We are the second worst state in the nation in terms of net export of college talent. We can thank the state from which I got my high school diploma, New Jersey, and Governor Christie for taking the #1 role. So here we are talking about jobs, and we're sending disproportionately the best and brightest to other states. Why? You know, I've made the argument before, it's because we have too few great research universities to attract people and keep them here. But if we aren't even keeping our high school students here, we're failing on the fundamentals, let alone the details.
Okay. Astonishing numbers. I have, we're jumping around a little bit, I realize, but these are topics that were discussed today, and we began with a discussion of core learning or liberal arts learning in the university environment. I noticed in the materials that were handed out, and I had a chance to review them, there was a comparison in there that I found fascinating, and I just wonder if anyone's willing to take this on and make a statement about it, and that is, what is the difference in a 21st century liberal arts or core learning and the 20th century approach to core learning that engineers take and scientists and so forth? How does it need to change? Is it changing? Who's willing to take that on and compare it?
Well, I'm going to speak from the community college perspective, and community colleges, most of us are comprehensive. We provide the first 2 years for those that are moving on to their baccalaureate degree through an Associate of Arts or Associate of Science. A lot of times that content is, all the time, it's predicated on, in Texas, the core curriculum, which pretty much is 42 of the 60 hours and then the additional 18 hours. So for us in community colleges, a lot of that is pretty well set. At the university level, of course, it's different as they move on to their upper division coursework. But let me speak for a moment about the other part of our comprehensive nature, and that is the career and technical focus. What some of you may not be familiar with if you're not in the community colleges is that a student can get either a certificate, which can range anywhere from 30 to 42 hours, credit hours, or they can get an Associate of Applied Science degree, which typically runs about 60 hours, some a little over 60 depending on the area. But in that Associate of Applied Science degree, by our accreditation requirements, and in Texas we're all under SACS, the student does need to have the 15 general education hours. And so hearing the conversation that we heard throughout the day, it's critical that those students that are going into business and industry not just know the technical part of it. I mean, that's critical. We at Lee College cannot send a student to ExxonMobil into a field like process technology or instrumentation or electrical without the technical skills. They have to have it. What they also need to have, though, because we all hear it from industry all the time, is they need to be good communicators. They need to be able to write. They need to be able to speak. They need to be able to listen. They need to be able to solve problems. They need to be able to be critical thinkers. And so for us at the community college level, having the student prepared on the technical side for moving on, because again, some of these students are not going to go just into the workforce. They will do that. But some of them are going to go on later into a baccalaureate degree, because the pathways that the universities now have provided for students with two-year technical degrees is much greater today than it ever has been. So that preparation is essential for the job. but it's also essential for the future pathway that that student follows in terms of advancing their higher education. So it's, you know, university, a student comes in, we're going to get a baccalaureate degree. Community college, you can get the first 2 years, or you can get a career and technical pathway and go into the workforce with the possibility of eventually moving on into an advanced degree after that. So I think that for the liberal arts portion of it, it's got to be an essential component of any program of study, regardless of what the pathway is. And I understand, you know, we heard this morning about the engineers. If you want to make money, be an engineer. Well, we're not all about making money, and we know that. But the pathways for a 2-year degree in the petrochemical industry in the Houston area right now, annual salary $86,000 as a process operator with an Associate of Applied Science degree. If that's what you want to do, that's great and that's wonderful, but you're not going to be a good process operator if all you have is the technical part. So I really see a blending. I see a blending of the liberal arts, I see a blending of the technical piece, and I certainly, without a doubt, see the need for the math and science and the STEM component as being essential in anyone's degree.
I agree. And I certainly want to be careful with my comments about this, and we all speak from certainly our experience. And we go back to something, Kate, that you referred to before, and I take it personal experience. I'm one of the few people in the room probably that grew up during what we call the Sputnik era. I believe I took maybe 15 to 18 hours in the liberal arts. And if you weren't taking mathematics or engineering, you weren't going to college. I actually taught and did research for about 10 years after I finished my undergraduate education. I spend all of my time now trying to relate to people, to raise funds, writing, speaking. Who would have ever thought? But I certainly agree, and I think we're trying to develop an argument there or a discussion that's almost not there. It is really obvious what we need to do in terms of core learning and core education.
And I think an issue that we're seeing more and more in career services is how do you measure competency? And how do you, particularly when you have a curriculum that are things like liberal arts, how do you measure the competency when someone says, oh, take the liberal arts, you have good communication skills? What does that really mean? And how do you find a way to be able to explain that to an employer? And that's something that we're tackling in our office right now. How do we help measure this for employers?
Right. Did we miss anything? Does anybody want to go on?
If I could add to
Go
that,
ahead.
since I'm maybe the engineer up here, I want to first of all affirm the importance of liberal arts, but let me tell you what I worry about. I don't think we want to out-memorize the Chinese to compete in a global economy. And I think it's human creative genius that is so important. And I think the liberal arts are so complementary to the other fields, so essential to human creative genius that they have to be a part of it. I worry about two things. I worry about the attention span of today's students and their ability to focus on things. I don't worry about their interest in the liberal arts because they will take a look at it as they are exposed to it. But I worry too about this teaching to the test and the emphasis on memorization, credentialing and so forth. And I worry that we're beating down the creative spirit of our young men and women. And I personally feel that that is the great advantage that this country has always enjoyed, and I sure hope we don't mess it up.
Thanks. Great statement. Did we miss anything? We have probably 5 to 10 minutes for questions, and I think we have people who would be willing to take something on. Is there something we missed? Does anyone have a question of this group? We'll see if we can tackle it. I believe everyone's worn out a little bit. Okay, David Watt told me to get this thing over with. So, okay, thank you all for staying. We've enjoyed it, and thank you, panel, for your answers. I think it really did summarize things, what we've done today very well, and good luck back home. Thanks a lot. Okay, all right.